this thing on?
I think we're live now, Jake.
Are we?
I mean, you're here.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, we really didn't rehearse this at all, so this is going to be completely unscripted. We're coming to you live at RSA, so for those of you who are not here, you're lucky. The rest of you, sorry, but thank you for joining us in person. I hope we were able to ameliorate your disappointment with the free libations.
Indeed. Indeed. So it's been a great day at RSA, definitely. I got a chance to watch somebody urinate in the street just a few minutes ago. That was fantastic. But other than that, what else have you seen today?
Well, I got to spend the entire day at the AGC conference, so I got to deal with all the finance people, hearing the latest on how the market is going to crash yesterday, and make sure cash is king, or queen, I guess, it's depending on which way you go.
Whichever. I try to do security stuff, yeah, like we do. Yes, but I'm happy that you got a chance to do all that for me, and I didn't have to deal with any of that. Loving it, loving it.
All right, let's start killing some sacred cows. So, I know, just right to it, right to the jugular.
Yeah.
All right, well, I mean, so let's start off, right? Like, you're kind of a known entity. A few people have heard of you.
A little bit. Okay.
So why the hell did you come and work in our little ragtag team here at Site, Jake?
Well, so I've been doing incident response for a lot of years, and the number one thing that I deal with in IR when I'm in the middle of an investigation is I'm bringing a finding to the client, and they say, but our security tools would have stopped that, should have stopped that. Sometimes I can call a liar, where they're like, that definitely didn't happen.
Well, Jake, it's your fault, right? You don't work here, but clearly by showing that Amber's not wearing clothes, I mean, that's your fault.
Obviously, right? Kill the messenger. That's the number one thing you learn in security is kill the messenger, right? And I think all of us are tracking with that. Yeah, I felt one. I was like, maybe do more incident response, and not at the moment, right? And then I kind of looked around and I was like, do I want to do red team? And not really, right? And so said, where can we really make a difference? And I don't know, that's it.
Hold on, so wait, Scythe is not a red team platform?
I mean, I guess it could be a red team platform, right? As a matter of fact, that's actually, I think, the moment when we were discussing that when I signed, I believe, was the, right? Because I believe we were talking about red team, and then suddenly you're like, hey, this is a lot more than red team. And I started looking at and got to the, yeah.
All right, this is the part where I get to throw you under the bus.
Indeed you do.
Okay, this is a true story. So Jake has spent a lot of time looking for, I think, the right place to go.
To land, sure.
To land, to do your thing. And I was like, hey, man, we're on IANS together. We've known each other for a few years. We had probably the only stenographic conversation in person that I've ever had with anybody. We actually were on a flight together, and we had an entire classified conversation just by pointing.
Whoa, not a classified conversation.
Sorry, not a classified conversation.
Clear on this. For jail, right? Anyway, so yes, but like hey, we're about where you kind of pointing, and you're like, yeah, but
there was lots of implications,
so
right? Yes. And so I was like, hey, I think you would be a great fit here. And you're like, I think so as well, which is why I'm already writing you a page-long essay on how this isn't going to work. Now, do you remember when you did that?
Was it a page-long essay?
It was a page. I mean, it felt like a fucking page.
It wasn't a page long. It was the not a why this isn't going to work, right? Let's be clear. I didn't understand the vision, right? I think it took us we were doing a lot of back and forth text and a little bit of email, and I believe it took us about 30 minutes on the phone. And I believe I signed that day and started that Monday. Signed that Friday, let's be clear, and started Monday. I'll also never forget Liz, who I've known for quite some time, several years actually, Chief Ops. It was April 1st that I signed. And Liz texted me and she said this, actually, said this better not be an effing, anyway, this better not be an April Fool's joke. Right? And I'm like, no, Liz, it's totally not an April Fool's joke. I really am starting Monday. But it was really that, right? It's expansion of vision. I'm not, don't get me wrong. Look, if you do red team, that's awesome. I did that for years. It's fun stuff. But look, at the end of the day, red team is a very, very, and I mean minuscule part of what we do in security. What we really, really need to do in security is understand how our security controls are working. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to go deploy security controls. That's obviously step one, right? But as we move up that maturity scale, people don't understand foundationally how their tools work, and I understand why. Because to really get that, right, you actually have to have red team members. Which how many of those? How many actual red teamers do we have out there versus what I like to call the light pink teamers, right? These are folks that saw a red teamer once in a hallway, they bumped elbows, and they're like, now I'm a red teamer, almost like got some blood on you or something, and now you're like, yeah, I'm a red team. Or you read an ethical hacking book one time? Well, right.
Well, I mean, you open an ethical hacking book on my coffee table.
I was
so
going to say,
by osmosis.
yeah, that's it. You didn't open this, you cracked the book at one point, and then you saw some awesome stuff about how to be a red teamer in math, right? Or better yet, Metasploit, right? You run Metasploit, you're a red teamer. Game on. No?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Anyway, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, so let's start by throwing the red team sacred cow first. So you made a comment earlier about how red teams zig and zag and why there's a disadvantage to that. I think we also can look at the problems of red teaming is valuable in as much as that it is assuring operations. Yes. Right? My job is, if security is the threat, then red team is my ability to replicate that threat. But how do I do that at scale, right? Even the light pink people, there are not that many of them, right? And there's an even smaller group of red teamers. So how are we meeting those requirements? And let's also go and pull in the automated red teaming folks into this as well. So we're going to throw a little bit of the product vendors under the bus, as well as the hardcore red teamers at the same time.
Okay, well, I don't want to throw any automated red teamers under the bus, right? They automate a function that a very, very small percentage of the industry can drive, right? And so if that's going to help you force multiply, outstanding, right? Game on. It's a great tool for a very, very small minority of the population. I think I've actually told you the story. I was out at, actually I can't say which client, but I was out at a large, we'll put it in the Fortune 200, organization where they do have a red team. They've got a headcount of 8. I was there actually to do a purple team exercise a few years ago. As I went in, I wanted to obviously talk to the red team manager. I want to talk to the blue team folks as well. I said, hey, what are you getting out of the red team right now? And the blue team manager says, nothing. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? It's like, nothing. I was like, well, I mean, okay, nothing usable, right? But like, what actually are you getting? He's like, oh, they tell me when they hack something. I'm like, well, okay, that's a start, right? I'm like, and then they explain how they did it, right? He's like, no. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, no. So I went and I was positive this is BS. I go and talk to the red team manager, and he's like, yeah, if I tell them how we do it, they'll know how we get in, and then we won't be able to do our operations anymore. And I'm like, yeah, that is way the wrong attitude. But we see it. I know you've seen this elsewhere as well, right? It's like, if we tell them how we're getting in, if we tell them how we're operating, then we won't be able to operate. That's like, your job as a red teamer is to make blue better, period, right? The zigging and zagging thing we were talking about earlier, that's the reproducibility. That's basically being able, or taking I don't want to word this, basically taking a given threat, right, and then emulating it consistently, the same way every time, right? Because as much as I want those red teamers to zig and zag, right, for really hard, tough problems, when I'm doing control validation, I want them to do the same thing repeatedly, right? So that, I don't make a change, right? This is almost like a science fair in the 6th grade where they're like, change one variable at a time, right? If I got a human on the other end, right, immediately they're like, oh, how can I bypass this? Like, it's a challenge, right? Well, that's great in a very small number of circumstances, but that's not what I want for foundational control testing. I want you to get to level 1, that's great. Then we'll throw in our bypasses. Great, we'll go to level 2, and I'll throw more bypasses, right? But I don't want this individual here, right, zigging and zagging and trying to mess with the test where it's like, I hacked you, therefore I'm better, kind of thing, right? And I get that too much from red teamers. So anyway.
Well, I mean, the other part of this is, again, if red teaming is the assurance of operation.
Okay.
Operation is the 40-hour-a-week job that I have and that I do. So you've given me more work on top of the job I'm already doing.
Right.
Where are you to help me make that better and to fix that?
Yeah.
Which gets into the reproducibility, because that's my ability to even replicate the test to be able to understand how to improve it. Yep. Right? Breaking a control, getting domain, whatever thing that I've done, is not something as simple as snapping my finger and being like, okay, well, you can just do that too. Right. And you understand all of the implications that are needed to fix and remediate that.
Yep. Well, and how often too, as I talk to blue team managers, right, one of the things that I bump up against, and by the way, again, I want to make super clear, I'm not pooping on red team. Red team has a foundational purpose. There's no question about it. I will also say that 3/4 of the people I work with doing red team assessments do them very poorly. I don't mean technically poorly. I mean from a business value, driving business value, they do it poorly. Most blue team managers out there have dealt with this, where and I say blue team managed, whether that's a incident response commander or a stock lead, whatever that happens to be. Red team comes in, they bypass some control, like ha ha ha, we got in, right? And then they say, okay, well now we're gonna do a retest, right? Now, what should that retest be, right? You changed the control, you've adjusted monitoring. First and foremost, that retest should be do the same thing again and validate that you actually closed that specific hole. How many folks has that been reality for? And I'm guessing the number is not quite zero, but it's that number infinitely approaching zero, right? Because way too often the red team returns like, oh, okay, well that didn't work. Let me try this other thing. Because the red team, right, foundationally doesn't like to lose. And I'm air quoting lose here, right? Because right, the only time you lose is when you don't drive value for the organization, right? But again, right, we're kind of back to the why do you need a platform to do this, right? Why did you build a platform to do this?
Why did I build a platform?
Yeah.
It's easy. Somebody came to me with money.
Ah, okay, well, I can't. I can't argue with that. I just can't argue with that.
No, that's the origin story. There I was sitting in 2016 running a really cool boutique consultancy, Grim.
Mhm.
We hacked stuff. We were just having a good time. Probably about 30 of us and a very large organization. If we're being, vague, a Fortune 50 retailer.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, what is that? They do like two choices. It's the one in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And rhymes with Argot. And they came and they asked me to build a one-off tool to test a particular edge case. And I was shocked because I was like, wait a second. First, there's a use case for that.
Mhm.
Second, there's nothing that you can just go buy to do this, right? Doesn't Cobalt Strike cover all of this stuff? And that was my first exposure to realizing how much Cobalt Strike was basically kept up by, because it's not Cobalt Strike's fault, right? It's not Rafi's fault. It was the fact that any tool that reaches a certain level of visibility, all of the defensive vendors gain it.
Yep.
Oh, well, we catch that, and it doesn't hurt that it also is part of the threat. Right? We see Cobalt Strike actually getting used in real life. So it's that's a good self-licking ice cream cone. Like, you need to buy the tool to test before the criminal uses the same thing to go against you. But
Self-licking ice cream.
it was a good self-licking ice cream cone, but it was that any power user was required to constantly find the edge to keep it from end of life, right? And it's not Cobalt Strike's fault, but again, the vendors were keying on it, so the ability to drive testing against the game, it's just this arms race of how do I continue to find the edge. Well, and defense being as poor as it is in detection, literally just creating scratch code suddenly defeats everything.
Yeah.
And so that was the original use case that they were asking was, hey, could you just build us this one-off tool that's got basic command and control? We can run some commands through shell, and that we know that won't get caught because it's literally from scratch and EDR hasn't yet been able to key on it. And I was like, well, I mean, that means you have to come back to me in 3 months because they're going to see the detections and then they're going to signature on it. And then all you've done is defeat a testing tool. You haven't actually matured your security. What if I built you a platform that just allowed you to scale that at your own pace? So that's actually where we were born. So no, I was not looking for this idea. I wasn't even paying attention to the red team space because we were just doing a lot of our own custom VR before John Hammond made it popular. That's you right there.
So can I ask you on the Cobalt Strike side, right? Because I know a lot of security professionals that love to really poop on Cobalt Strike. I am not one of them, right? Look, I recognize, like you said, it's a fantastic product. Yes, some criminals use it. Okay, a lot of criminals use it. Okay, more criminals use it than legitimate people use it, but whatever, right? What percentage of security professionals can use Cobalt Strike effectively?
Oh, I mean, you're talking about, again, I would say it's a subset of the overall set of red team pen testers.
Oh, sure.
Right? So, I mean, it's the de
number
facto choice. Oh, a number?
A number of security, like if we define security professionals, somebody who has
20,000. I think there are 20,000 globally who can use them.
Globally.
Yes.
Right, okay, yeah, so we're talking like a fraction of 8% of
Yep.
security professionals, right? Yeah, and I think that is a problem that we bump up against, but secondarily, am I trying to defend against Cobalt Strike or not? If I'm in a defense, am I trying to defend against Cobalt Strike or am I trying to defend against something else?
Well, both. right? I mean, because it is used maliciously, that is something I want to key on. I think getting to where you start to see the bigger value in all of this stuff is, and this has nothing to do with Cobalt Strike, it's any tool, right? When you game the system, all you've done is show that you can get an A+ on the game. When the reality is, I want to be able
Player attack evaluations. I'm sorry. There's a fly that flew down my apologize. Did somebody just get 100% on everybody got 100%, right?
Yes, that was the post I did up on Twitter of you've seen this, the North Korean generals where they have like the medals that go down to their like pants, right? They've had so many successful military campaigns, like, you know, we did this, and they're just covered with it. Well, that was every vendor after the latest MITRE attack eval. Hey, were you 100%? I was 100%. But my 100% was slightly better than their 100%. And I mean, that's what happens. It's gaming the game. And I don't think that's anybody's fault, other than that's where everybody's always going to go whenever you find that kind of easy button. And I think that's the challenge with all this stuff. And the kind of knocking ourselves, if we were more popular, if we were at more use, we would be gamed that same way as well.
So, but let's talk about that, right? Because that's actually where I was trying to go with this, right? Is that, you know, as a defender, I'm not trying to defend against a specific type of malware, a specific implant, right? I could try to do that, right? My problem there is the threat actor is going to change out that implant.
Oh, and how easy is it to change that out, right? If I add a 0, I've just changed the hash.
Sure, you change the hash, right? And now if I need to go beyond that, right? I want to go beyond maybe changing the hash, right? So, okay, so I'm going to shuffle some code around and obfuscate it from a packer, you name it. Look, at the end of the day, even if I go change out my implant, right? You know, I mean, it's no secret. I used to be an operator, right? Not a red team operator, like an actual operator. But I mean, look, you throw me with any implant, I still have the same give or take, right, operational methodology. It's an actions on objective, that phase 7 of the cyber kill chain, right? That's what I'm trying to really look at, because every threat actor is going to come down and perform actions on objectives, right? So, you know, if you give me the choice between, am I going to go try to anchor on or try to create detection engineering around Cobalt Strike, or again, let's take that name out. That was the last time I said those two words together today. But, you know, if I'm looking to go and anchor on, am I going to anchor on the implant or the actions the threat actor is taking? And really there, I'm really looking to move further right there so that I've got solid detections. I don't get me wrong, I'm definitely moving left as well, right? But I certainly want to get those, get some of those actions on objectives done. And I got to tell you, one of the things that was actually really interesting coming on the site, because again, total transparency, as I was shooting down the whole, like, here's why I'm not working here. That is a true story.
It was a one-page email.
It was not a one-page email.
I'm going to print it out. I'm going to post it somewhere.
Not a one-page email, right? But as I was walking through, hey, here's the reasons I don't think this has a, you know, this is such a great play, right, kind of thing. You know, I did absolutely get in a bit to that. I didn't know the product, right? And day one, as I'm getting into the product, I jump in there and I'm like, we actually have half the Conti playbook covered. You know, that of the Conti leaks, right, that had just happened. I'm like, we have half of that covered out of the box, and my mom could do it. Okay, well, never mind. It's you know, and so not to mention the threat emulations or the actual full-on adverse simulations, just at a procedure level, right? We had this huge chunk of coverage already done where you got to step back and look at that. I don't know if you guys talked about that internally because that predates me, but I hope you saw that as a win.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean, that was always the goal, is whatever the latest thing is, the first question everybody asks is that going to happen to me?
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to go, well, something I don't know about might happen to me,
Mm-hmm.
in which case I have no room to think about it or even to start. But here is an actual threat and going, well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's always been one of the big gaps that I've taken to task with the whole threat intelligence industry, right? Which is a $10 billion market. They're really good at telling me the very basics of what they discovered yesterday, and it has no bearing on what's going to happen to me tomorrow.
Yeah, and we want to be clear, we are not, as the director of threat intelligence at site, we are not taking a dump on threat intelligence vendors. Please don't take that as a takeaway here. But Vera, when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, right? A lot of threat intel, we may have been just recent this morning, actually, now I'm thinking about it, as we recap.
It's been a month of a day.
But we've also talked a lot about threat intel generally, right? Threat intel, so much of it is very, I don't want to say so high level as to be meaningless, but it's not actionable for the majority of organizations, right? It is very interesting that, you know, some North Korean threat actor is targeting the retail sector. Okay, cool, right? How are they going to do it, right? And then you get into some of these generic that, yeah, here's some MITRE techniques that they use. And I'm like, well, that's also cool, but like, again, what am I defending against, right? Like, how do I action that directly? And that's been a big challenge for a lot of orgs I talk about. I'm sure you as well.
Yeah, let's pick on that, right? So we've got the proverbial techniques, tactics, and procedures. Everybody throws TTPs around liberally. And I can go and read those analyst reports, and they have varying levels, and all of them now at least tag in MITRE techniques.
Yes.
And say, so I can look at the MITRE techniques, and I can go, well, at a minimum, that's a checklist. That's something I can go to a free tool like Atomic Red Team and be able to run those and get very, like, as in the name, atomic checks on that. But what else could I do? Where else can I go with that? What is the value or the limitation of that approach to what's possible?
Well, it's procedure level. It has to be procedure level, right?
So what?
Well, okay, so if you take a look and you think about a tactic, technique, procedure, I think about a tactic as, what is my overall kind of purpose of doing this thing, right? I think about a technique being a little bit more granular, describing a hopeful outcome, but not really describing how I'm going to get there. And a procedure is an example of how to achieve said outcome. Look, the reality is threat actors don't use tactics or techniques. They are constructs with which a threat actor thinks about how they're going to do something, right? But the actual no joke, where the rubber meets the road, what commands are we executing on target, right? That actions on objectives piece, that's all procedure level, right? And unfortunately, today in security, we do not do a lot of procedure level, unfortunately, do not do a lot of procedure level threat sharing. We certainly don't do a lot of procedure level emulation. And that's something we are absolutely changing.
So if I start working at that level, what would be the benefit I get from that?
Well, I mean, the benefit you get from the procedure level is you can actually test your controls, right? It drives me absolutely mad. And I know we've had this discussion, but I'm having it for the rest of the world now. It drives me mad when somebody comes back to me and they're like, Jake, I'm using MITRE ATT&CK to make sure I'm covered, right? I've learned how to do security from MITRE ATT&CK. I actually talked to a CISO 3 months ago. It was like, yeah, we now know how to do security better because we've adopted MITRE ATT&CK. And I'm like, that's about as intelligent as saying, hey, I'm learning how to speak English, so I read the dictionary, right? I mean, yes, the dictionary is a tool that can help you with specific English words, right? It is not a way to learn English, right? And so it's just the wrong tool for the job. I love MITRE ATT&CK, by the way. It's a fantastic taxonomy. To get down to the procedure level, we are emulating the actual steps threat actors take. And then your controls either work or they don't against those specific steps that we've seen. It's one thing for me to say, for instance, right? Credential dumping, right? How many different ways are there to do credential dumping that you can just think of off the top of your head?
Oh, I mean, probably 30, 40.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so when you step back then, you're like, oh, okay, right? Credential dumping being a technique, which one? And by the way, which one did your red team emulate? It wasn't all of them. I know the answer wasn't all of them, by the way, right? Because again, it's not that kind of time, right? And likewise, or I would say, I guess kind of as a corollary, did they emulate the hard one or the easiest one they could get away with? I mean, I know for me, it's the easiest one I can get away with.
It is whatever works.
Okay, I'll go with that too.
I would go
Whatever
with
works.
right. Easier and harder is relevant as much as it's the context of the environment that I'm trying to steal the credentials in, right? So
Well, fair.
this technique might be easy, but if I know it's not going to work, this is the one that I'm going to use and do it.
Yeah.
So it's easy for whatever actually steals the credentials, which is the attack perspective.
Yeah. Have you ever heard my thing on basically adversaries growing to the size of the tank?
Yep.
Yeah, with the pythons, right? So if you ever live in Florida, right, you've probably seen with these, they've got a little small snake problem down there, right? I hypothesize this typically starts with, some dude at like, 20, he's moved into his first college dorm, right? And he's like, I'm buying a python, right? And he's got money for maybe like a 50-gallon tank, thing grows about 2.5 feet, right? And then later, he grows up, graduates, right? He's like, heck yeah, buys a 200-gallon tank, thing grows to 5 or 6 feet, right? Gets a little bit more going on, right? And then he meets a woman, and she's like, oh, hell no, right? And then he goes and dumps in the swamp, and it grows to be like, oh my God, how big is this? Threat actors do the same thing, right? They are not executing techniques or techniques. They are not executing procedures.
That's our swear jar,
right? But seriously, they're not executing procedures that are any more advanced than they have to. We've also seen this, right? Where folks have been like, oh yeah, so we looked specifically for is an incident response service where they engineer detection specifically around using run DLL, right, to go dump with op services. To go run mini dump, in case anybody's not familiar with that. But then John's smile over is like, I'm familiar with that because we detect that. But very specifically, they did detection engineering against that, right? And then you have that very unfortunate situation where they're like, yeah, so they still dumped your credentials anyway. They're like, how, right? Or like any of the other ways. Actually, in this case, with proc dump, right? At free system levels. And so you kind of look around at like, okay, at a procedure level, if you're emulating a procedure level, then you run all of those tests, right? You collect those procedures, and you can run them one by one against your control stack and say what worked, what didn't, where can we tune.
All right, so let's pivot to the factoid RSA. This is the pinnacle of billions and billions of dollars of commercial R&D and marketing being marketed at you. Oh, make sure you shower every day. What technology do you think is the most overhyped?
Ooh. Only one?
We can do more than one.
It's got to be DLP. Has to be DLP. Has to be DLP.
Because it doesn't do any of the P part?
No. So, while it was Hackfest a month ago, right, I gave a talk on ransomware and generally architecting for ransomware defense. And I highlighted there in all of my incident response cases, never has DLP prevented a threat actor from removing data from the network, ever. It's never alarmed on it. It's never prevented it. Never. Right? It's just I don't want to say that it's useless. It's not. DLP does a lot of great things, but it is the wrong tool for that job and many other jobs that people just naturally assume it will do. Right? I think probably the second most overhyped tool, and I expect folks to throw lots of. Actually, can I do this? Should we
go for
this?
it? Yes,
right?
we should.
Okay, then it's EDR. Has to be EDR. Look. Not all EDRs are created equally, and I think everybody's tracking with that. But by the way, if you're asking which EDR is the best EDR, the answer is the one you tune. It's the one you tune, right? That's the reality. Look, we know from the Conti playbook, right? As if you wouldn't have known this otherwise. We know from the Conti playbook that they were trying to acquire two very specific EDRs that they had a hard time getting around, so that they could develop bypasses for those EDRs. Now, when you hear develop a bypass for the EDR, what does that mean?
Making sure the EDR can't see you.
In default mode.
Yep.
In default state, out of the box, right? So again, and also too, if you go talk to any of the folks, if they're willing to actually level with you, actually, we're at a marketing event. They didn't bring any of their detection engineers or any of their developers with them. But if they had, right, you could go and talk to some of these vendors and say, hey, what's your number one concern in a client environment? And I promise you, it is not security. It's not security. It's no false positives, particularly in block mode, right? Because the reality there is you're creating a denial of service condition,
yep.
Right? And so I've talked to vendor after vendor, right, who kind of steps back and like, well, I mean, of course, security, but we can't break anything, right? And it makes sense. Look, if I'm a CISO, you miss something, hey, that's a bad day, right? You actually block IT operations, you're getting ripped out.
Well, you get the phone call of the angry user who's like, why are you stopping me from doing my job?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Or causing a system outage or ... Right.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. So it's whichever, like EDR, I don't want to say is the technology itself outstanding. The way people employ it, horrible. Right. Can't tell you how often I go into in incident response environments, historically, right? In incident response environments, and find out that somebody's created a huge exclusion, right? Where they're like, oh yeah, ignore anything in the following path or subpaths with an exe extension, right? And then you go and you're like, oh, which path is it? You're like, C users. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? And so it's like everything you downloaded right now can run just fine. And it's got an exclusion. It doesn't even alarm, right? You as a CISO want to know that your security team has done this. This is like getting one of those like awesome like bank grade vaults, right? And then you put the combination like with a post-it note on the outside of the vault door, and you're like, you predictable results, right? Anyway, what's your most hyped technology, overhyped technology here?
I think it's SOAR.
Ooh, talk about sacred cash cow tipping.
No, sacred cash cow tipping, because we're following on the EDR, and here's the challenge that I've seen is I of course get to talk to a lot of customers, and a lot of these customers have SOAR, and so they're already paying money. And I'm like, so do you use it? So it's a lot of these things, like the concept of SOAR is great. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm spending all this money on tooling, and there's two approaches to tooling. There is the fact that I want it to be better, and then there's the fact I want it to be more efficient, right? Better is tuning. I'm making a tool work for me. Efficient just means the tooling is less annoying. And there's value in that, right? I have these things, I want them to be less irritating to me. And that's the promise of SOAR. And the reality is that nobody's using it to achieve that because the efficiency isn't been worth the squeeze.
Yep. Well, consistently, I talk to CISOs, right? Who are like, yeah, I'm buying a SOAR platform so I can reduce headcount. And I'm like, yep, you've foundationally missed what SOAR does. Foundationally. By the way, folks, if you are buying SOAR to reduce headcount, right, just throw your money my way. I will burn it just as quickly as you will, right? Yeah, I'll burn 10% of that money. You can save the other 90, right?
Hey, that's a pretty good deal.
Indeed, it is. Yes.
Can we do that? Can we throw it
Just-
out here?
yeah.
If you're already
I'll burn it
burning
for
money,
you.
we'll
Yeah.
save you 10%.
There'll be a collection bucket.
Yeah.
Around
No, but seriously, right? Like if that's your plan is go deploy SOAR and reduce headcount, like that is some of the most backward thinking that I get it, right? From a marketing standpoint, that's a promise. It's like, yeah, and then you can automate all these repetitive tasks. You won't need as many people. And every time I hear a vendor say that, I just want to like slap them, right? We can't assault anybody, right?
Are we allowed to assault people?
I'm not HR and marketing.
A CISO right here is nodding yes. I'm going to take that
nodding yes, take it
as
as
a
a
legal
go.
opinion.
Right? But no, I mean that's okay. SOAR is definitely overhyped.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to the audience. What's the tech that you want us to talk about?
Zero trust.
Zero trust.
Okay, you starting or am I?
I mean, do you trust me to start?
Go. Yes.
Yes. But yeah, I think zero trust is another one where. So let me start with the good in how it was invoked into the public consciousness, and that would be the executive order issued from the White House a little bit more than a year ago. So why do I care that the White House said anything about zero trust? Because I think zero trust, for the most part, is a marketing term. It's the fact that what we do for a living has reached the level of public understanding that would even be said at that level. That's valuable. The fact that it's stupid, well, all right, you know what? We can take it for now. Maybe in the future will be better when we do it, but that's a good start, right? And I feel bad for all of the folks throughout federal government that are now having to try to be like, well, now we need to be zero trust, whatever that means that came from this thing. That's not my problem. And unfortunately, I'm not trying to make money from it, so I don't care either way. But my problem with zero trust, just like I see I have so many of these things where I see experts that like us who sit up here and are like, well, you know how you solve that? You just do zero trust. And you know what? That can just be solved by segmentation. You should segment everything and your problems, we got this.
Any vendor that uses the word just in their sales pitch is absolutely lying to you. Any security professional uses the word just foundationally misunderstands the problem.
Another one, right? Just patch it. You know what your problem is? You need to just be patching things. I don't know why you didn't think about this. If you just applied the patches, problem solved. You can't get hacked because all of the 0 days solved, right? The just expert thing. And that's where I see experts get up there and say, like, just do zero trust networking. And the problem is it gets back to what I've seen fundamentally as a challenge for this industry that goes back all the way to the 1980s when IT was first becoming relevant. It's configuration management. I need to know what I have. I need to be able to establish a process around maintaining that, deploying it, and pushing it. And that's the level of granularity to balance the level of zero trust that I can effectively implement in my environment versus my ability to not irritate the living fuck out of users by being a denial of service.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong on any of that. I can sum up zero trust in very, very easy way to think about it is, it's effectively denial permit by exception. And it's just that easy, really just that easy, right? Okay, I mean, why is it just that easy? Well, or actually it can't be easy, right? We failed at
Well,
it
you can't
for so
say
long.
just.
No, I know, I'm being facetious there. But the problem is that you need to understand everything then that goes on your network. And that involves you going back to your vendors, right, who have supplied you with software. It goes back to a lot of your custom in-house devs and turning to them and saying, what are all the normal things I should expect? Because if you deny all and only permit by exception, that means there must be a complete list of all the authorized behaviors, or you're blocking them, right? That's obviously subpar, right? It's not an ideal that we would, that we would choose to set up there. And I say obviously subpar. It is the utopia of security if we can get there. The reality is we can't in the vast majority of circumstances, because in most cases, I can't even do that at the DNS level, right? Forget east-west traffic internally, right? Even to look at a DNS dump from just a week and say, hey, pick out the domains that stand out as wrong to you, right? We are so far off from being able to do zero trust. By the way, too, dare I ask, I'm not going to pull an audience here, right? But if you went and asked 10 security professionals, what does zero trust mean to you? You're going to get 10 very different answers. So I'm with you. Zero trust is way, way overhyped. That probably should have been my first one. Yeah.
What's another one?
Attack surface management.
Attack surface management. Oh, I love ASM.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Randori on your acquisition by IBM.
Oh, that's where you ended it?
No, I was just congratulating
okay.
Randori on their
Okay.
acquisition by IBM.
Yeah.
They're a attack service management vendor.
Yeah.
Now let's trash ASM.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my problem with ASM, and it's inconvenient, John Hammond picked that moment to leave because I would throw him into this as a premier penetration tester, is everybody will sit here and nod their head when I say the perimeter is dead. Right?
The perimeter
is dead. But the perimeter is dead.
The perimeter is, in fact, not dead.
Because we know that a determined adversary will get in. A threat that wants in will get in. However much money you spent, however clever you are, you will lose that
Eventually.
fight. Eventually.
Sure.
It's an eventual thing, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is I don't have to be technically clever to do it. We've created an entire ecosystem called email, which lets everybody in.
By design.
Email is the greatest hacking tool of all time. Prove me wrong. So by design, I am letting everybody in, and I'm doing this. So my problem when we sit there and everybody fundamentally agrees, yes, that's possible. Me spending money on that, right? The perimeter is dead. Except when you look at what a CISO's response is, their initial budget, if they were to pick something to invest in this, it will be attack surface management.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it is human reason fighting human psychology. Reason tells me assume breach and post access is the greatest value of my business. Human psychology says, I want to try to keep you out and I will invest as much as possible to keep you out. And I don't care if it's a rational thought, because it's not. That's where I end up going every time. And I watch that decision happen over and over, where I literally have this conversation and they go, yes, that's correct. And then they immediately, as soon as they've given the option, they're like, well, no, actually, this is what I want to do. Philosophically, they say one thing. In practice, they say another, because one of those is really aspirational, and it's the psychological fear that drives the decision.
Okay, so I'm going to give my 2 cents on attack surface management. I do think it's a very useful tool for a very small number of organizations, right? Far too often what I see attack surface management being used for are people that can't do good vulnerability scanning externally and can't operationalize it externally. Meaning your external, I'm focusing, by the way, when we say attack surface management, on the external attack surface, EASM, right? The external attack surface management. But far too often there, it's used as a Band-Aid for bad vulnerability scanning, right? And also bad configuration management, right? Where they're like, what happens? We do monthly scans, and what happens if somebody changes something between the time we scan this month and the time next month? And I'm like, if that's really your fear, then you need to really be looking internally, because there's no question you're getting breached, and EASM is not going to fix that, right? And so, I'm on record, almost a decade ago now, with the whole assume breach piece, right? You have to assume a threat actor is going to bypass your defenses. I know, because I did it religiously, right? That didn't come out of a woohoo, right? But threat actors do it religiously, right? And so, there's that old saying, something about the 30-foot wall makes a market for 32-foot ladders.
Yep.
Right. It's that's it. That's the reality. And so I'm all about trying to set up detection. I'm not saying that I've given up on defense. Please don't think that. Right. I do need to do the basics. Right. But if the question is, am I going to invest in an attack surface management tool? I definitely am, but I'm going to understand why I'm doing it. Is it a Band-Aid for something else? Right. And even then, I'm also going to recognize that as I deploy said tool, I've got to look at what happens after a threat actor gets in, because to your point, that's trying to build a bigger wall, right?
And
So-
I think another part that is driving that is the cloud, right?
Oh,
the
of course it
cloud's
is.
economic utility
The
and
cloud.
convenience of the cloud,
The cloud.
of being able to just spin these things up, which we do, and we love to do that. But then it's like, yeah, but where do I clean it up? Where am I even aware of where it goes? And how long are those things around? And so EASM in that regard is very much the Band-Aid to do the cleanup, because I don't have the policy and let alone the enforcement of that policy to ensure
Yeah.
that I am in fact killing off the things that don't need to be staying out there, because anything that stays out there is attack surface.
Sure. And by the way, if you're looking to hunt for this stuff, you don't need EASM necessarily to go hunt for the rogue IT. You need to get involved with your finance department, the people that do reimbursements, right? Because when developer Joe goes over to DigitalOcean, right, or heck, you could be on AWS, right, and they go to AWS, but they reimburse it, right? They didn't go through your corporate account, right? It's getting reimbursed as a charge. Go nuke that from orbit, right? Extreme prejudice, right? I'm sorry, not violence. Don't go violent ever, right? But anyway, yeah.
What's another one?
Cyber credit reporting.
Cyber credit reporting.
Oh,
Wait, are we talking about like the security scorecard types or the?
Yeah, like that. Exactly like that. That's maybe exactly the company I was thinking of.
kind of exactly the one you were thinking of.
Yeah.
Are you starting this?
I'm not starting this.
Okay. Look, I'm not going to use the words less than useless. Right? I'm definitely not going to use those words, right? Because
But
less
it
than
rhymes
use-
with that.
Well, no, I don't know that covers the depth of my disdain.
I didn't
right,
mean to interrupt.
for those. No, please, by all means. You're close, right? But look, there are things less than useless things, right? Or things that you look at and you're like, why? Not just this thing isn't useful to me, but why does it exist? Actually, I guess I can think of why this exists in some cases. But when you have something that actively makes me do work on things that don't increase my security, while I could be taking those same resources and applying them elsewhere, my number one thing that drives me up the wall, by the way, if you're watching this, right, your security rating, whatever vendors, if you throw one more unsupported Cypher suite, vulnerable to poodle at me, I will go violent. It's a promise, right? Because I'm watching folks here who are spending resources, expending limited security resources, trying to get in and patch some unsupported Cypher suite or deal with this. And now it's taken this one on one external facing server. They're like, you went from an A+ to a C-. And you're like, why? Show me, actually walk me through the exploit here, right? I had a case. Did I tell you about dealing with the auditor a while back? But it's been a couple of years back. I was dealing with an auditor 2-3 years ago, and he's like, yeah, see that site-to-site VPN? It's vulnerable to poodle. And I'm like, neat. I was literally neat. He's like, they could take all of the bank's data. I'm like, really? With poodle? He's like, yes. People do it all the time. I'm like, as an incident responder, I've never seen anybody exploit poodle. I've seen, obviously, we're aware of the proof of concept, right, type of stuff, right? But I'm like, walk me through how this is going to happen. On site-to-site VPN, by the way, right? I'm like, show me how that's going to happen. And he's like, well, I'm an auditor. I'm not a red teamer. And I'm like, well, that's cool, but red teamers that do this, right? And he's like, all the time, right? I travel with cash, right, typically, and I took some cash out, and we'll just say that I threw a couple $1,000s down on the table as my travel money, right? And I was like, my emergency travel fund, right? And I said, and I said, hey, go ahead, call them up. I'm sure their time is worth it. You can just split it with them, right? Because they can do it all the time. It's trivial, right? They can exploit it. And he's like, well. And I'm like, oh, it's a number problem. It's only a couple $grand, no problem. I'm going to throw 25,000 down, buy COB. You get a red teamer in here to exploit this, right? Couldn't do it. Unsurprisingly. I mean, my money was safe there, right? Like 1,000%. We could have gone with 2.5 mil, whatever number you want to throw out there. They're not going to exploit it. But it didn't matter because that stuff shows up on security scorecard and people, sorry, I just said the vendor name. That stuff shows up on these vendor tests, right? These score rating, security credit rating, that's what you called it, tests. It shows up on those and people spend all this time dealing with that when they have unpatched stuff elsewhere, right? And no EDR, no tuning, none of that. Anyway, I can rant on this for days. Sorry,
So what I would summarize what that piece is when I add my own tangent is that it is again the surface level without the context right?
Without understanding
Right.
what you're looking
There's
at.
no
Yeah.
there's no
That's-
business context to what that means, or does it even mean anything to this business? Because just because something is here doesn't mean that the follow-on is the same for
Right.
everybody.
Right.
The problem that I have with it is, and I don't know enough to explicitly fault the vendors for this, but there's definitely an extortion ecosystem around it where, hey, these are the folks who pay us. We ran the report. You're a C-. They won't buy your stuff until you're an A. And of course, you're like, well, how do I get an A? And it's like, well, you have to buy the report. And so then you buy it, and then you try to figure it out. And that just doesn't seem right, where I'm scanning and holding you hostage to you trying to grow your business until you fix my checklist.
We aren't going to mention names either, but there are at least one of those vendors, or there is at least one of those vendors that absolutely will help you do reviews. Paid, of course, right? Because they got to bring in their consultants to do reviews to determine is something a false positive or not, right? So no, that's not really your infrastructure, right? We're sorry, we didn't mean to scan that and call it your infrastructure.
Yep.
Right. I'm sure you've never dealt with that either, though. Of course
No,
not.
no, it'd be a real shame if someone came in and broke all these single panes of glass while you weren't looking.
Yeah, that's yes, all that.
One more.
So,
Sim.
Oh, you're starting that one.
Okay. All right. I think I'll start with the obvious, which is the fact that they are built on the concept that the more data you store, the more you pay. I think that's its own version of extortion, right? Like the more value you're getting out of what you need, the more you're going to be paying for that. And of course, there's you are very much stuck then in this data retention problem. We know there's the balance of we don't know an attacker is here until X point. And so then we try to figure out how long we can go. And so what should that storage log be? And the SIM, of course, is where I want it because I need a centralized analytic platform to be able to figure this shit out. But how much money am I going to pay for that potential privilege to someday have to do that if that breach happens? So I think that is an unfortunate tension that I see in the SIM piece.
Okay, well, I'll go then, right? And I'm just going to say that in the history of doing incident response, right, I would say probably half of the folks that I work with that have a SIM, I'm going to like slice off the folks that just don't. But half of the folks that we go in are like, oh, you got a SIM. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, what's being logged? They're like, everything. And I'm just like, done. Like, we're going to stop right there, right? Because it's not everything. And it's like, well, what do you mean by everything? I'm like, do you got workstation logs? Like, oh, no. We meant all the servers. You're like, oh, well, then you've got all the security logs. And I was like, well, we've got the login logs from the domain controllers. And they're like, okay. And that comes back to the problem you're talking about, right? Is that folks have to make, by the way, I want to be like super clear, SIM is critical. You should have a SIM on your network, right? Let's check that box, right? Unlike some of the other stuff we've talked about, which maybe you shouldn't, right? But you're up to figure out which ones of those are. Anyway, but you should have a SIM on your network. That said, what you talked about is critical there, right? Now, if you've got an on-prem SIM, right, the amount of storage that, I know those are falling out of vogue now, right? But as you want to scale that storage up, that's not a linear cost, right? It's a bit logarithmic, right? So, you know, meaning the more storage you need there, the bigger hardware you need, right? Yep. And suddenly you end up buying like, you know, $1 million in storage alone just to handle your SIM, right? And so, but you know, I mean, some people, I'm not saying everybody, but that definitely happens. As you move to the cloud side, you've got a separate problem, which is, you know, obviously you're paying 100% OpEx and not CapEx, right? But separately, you then have to send all that data out of your network in the first place. And suddenly bandwidth sometimes I see somebody nodding in the back here like, you've been there, done that, have that battle scar, right? And bandwidth suddenly becomes an issue, right? And so, look, the reality is that SIM is an awesome tool when you understand how to, and I hate to use this word again, tune it, right? Almost like if you picked the most important logs from the right systems that covered, don't fall out of your chair here, right? That covered the actual procedures being used by threat actors so you could detect a threat actor in your network, right? The number of times that I oftentimes refer, have you heard my log toilet analogy? No? We haven't talked about log toilets? How is this a thing? How is this a thing? Far too often the SIM gets used as a log
Should I have log toilet paper here?
No. Like it's a compliance toilet, right?
Oops.
They're like, oh, hey, you know,
Compliance
we gotta have
is a
this
toilet.
log,
You heard it
right?
here first.
No. The SIM gets used as the compliance toilet. It's like, and I use the toilet because it's like you're flushing money down the drain, right? flushing money down the drain. But yeah, so that's yeah. I mean, so I kind of look at it as figuring out what is it that you actually need to put in the SIM. This kind of comes back to your side too, which is how long can I afford to store it for? Because that's the reality of the question, right? It's not how long do I want to store it for? How long should I? It's how long can I afford to? And if you're only storing the stuff that supports the use cases and validates, right? You validated these support the use cases you need to detect, you can increase that retention for the same amount of spend. Just throwing that out there. Take it from me. I'm a forestry services influencer. You know that story, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had a company contact me a while back, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to do some influence work, right?" And they start sending me brands, and it's like a chainsaw and like a logging truck and stuff I do not understand at all. And I'm like, I don't know where you got my information, but game on. They're like, "You're a forestry services influencer. You get some of the best engagement ever on forestry services stuff." And I'm like, no. They're like, I'm like, I need to know how you got here. This is how I know, by the way, Skynet is not going to take over, right? They're like, you have some of the best engagement ever on social media for log management. And I'm like, your AI sucks, right? This sounds a lot like SOAR, actually.
Yeah, it does. There you go.
Right?
See how it came
But
around.
yeah, they're just like, oh yeah, log management. And I'm like, wrong logs, brother, wrong logs, right?
So back on the log piece there, a framework that I don't see talked about more often is the detect framework, where I'm establishing what visibility of sources tied into threat intelligence, tied into blue team operations.
Yeah.
I forget who created it.
Was it one of our team folks?
No.
Oh, snap.
DETT and
Oh,
CT.
no, I know. No, it's MITRE.
Yeah.
I know.
No, it's not MITRE. No, so they mimicked the MITRE phrasing because you have ATT
Oh,
and
that's
CK.
right. It's defend
and
is the MITRE one.
I don't remember who it did, but somebody came up with detect. They copied the attack verbiage approach, but they're actually not with MITRE.
Okay, this one I may be missing here. So
okay, it's DETT and CT detect.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Framework, and it is all around an establishment of mapping, because right, like we were talking about, what logs should go into my SIM. And if you think about it, that's the establishment of my visibility to be able to do my operations, analytics, and threat hunting and all of those pieces.
Yeah.
Well, like anything, having a purposeful approach to being able to build that up to create value is useful.
Yep.
So that's what the detect framework is. I'm surprised. It definitely is not getting talked out enough.
Obviously, it's not getting talked about enough, right? I'm going to have to go look this one up here.
Yeah.
But this seems like a good place to, I don't know.
All right. Well, so we're gonna wrap up. Your final 2 cents of whatever you want to say about whatever you want to talk about.
Yikes. How about this? If you're not doing detection engineering, I promise you, if there's not a threat actor in your network today, there very well will be one tomorrow, or could be one tomorrow. I'm not a FUD guy, but I've sat on the other side of the keyboard. And the reality is that the threat actors do not know your custom detections. They just don't. They can't, right? If you want to give a threat actor a really, really bad day, it's do detection engineering, right? Because they can't know the custom stuff before they get there. They're going to trip on a tripwire they did not know existed.
So we took a lot of market categories to task today. I will leave in how to pick a vendor with 2 steps.
Ooh.
Step 1, determine if you can trust the vendor. Step 2 is what you talked about with tuning, is the fact that whatever the tool is, it does not work out of the box for you. You have to invest in making the tool yours. If the vendor says you don't need to do that, see step 1, don't trust them.
That's actually really, really good advice. Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you. Okay. Now I need to go look up the tech because I legit.
DETT